Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight or today, depending on what time zone you're in. So we are here for a webinar on standardized testing, specifically the SAT and the ACT. So let's get started. So I wanted, first of all, my name is Antonia Estrada. I'm the program coordinator at Uproot Academy. I'm joined tonight by Shantae Lipscomb, another Uproot Academy team member. Hi, Shantae. And our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Jennifer Winward of Winward Academy. Dr. Winward, thank you for being here tonight. I just want to say a few words about Uproot Academy and who we are before we get started. So at Uproot Academy, we want students to feel confident, courageous, and competitive when they apply to college. That's why we are ruthless in our pursuit to alleviate the anxiety and confusion around the college selection and application process. And that's why we're here tonight to offer this webinar on standardized testing. Um, and a few more words. After tonight's webinar, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to fill out a quick survey. Your feedback and opinions are important to us because they help us improve future workshops. And by filling out a survey, you'll have a chance to win a $25 gift card. And finally, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and Dr. Winward can answer them at the end of her presentation. So I'd like to move on now to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Jennifer Winward, founder and CEO of Winward Academy. So I just need to refer to my notes here to properly introduce Dr. Winward. So Dr. Winward earned her PhD with a dual emphasis in neuroscience and developmental neuropsychology from the University of California, San Diego. She is a member of Phi Beta Kappa and graduated summa cum laude with highest distinction honors. She is a distinguished teaching professor at UCSD, a renowned 20-year veteran of high school tutoring, and the founder and CEO of Winward Academy, a research-based learning platform designed for ACT, SAT, math, and college applications. Winward Academy's curriculum is used by students at home, by teachers in the classroom, and by charities and after-school and summer programs. So Dr. Winward, welcome. I'm going to stop now sharing my screen and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Estrada, for that nice introduction. Hello, everybody. Let me go ahead and get this presenting, and then I can jump in. So yes, thank you again so much for inviting me tonight. I do have to give you all a warning that just in the past day, I've started to feel a little flu-y. So I'm a little bit congested and I've been sneezing a lot. So anyway, apologies in advance if my voice is not as bold and excited as it would have been otherwise. But again, thank you so much for having me. I know that there's so much confusion right now going on in the world of ACT and SAT and test optional, or do I still have to take it? And now the SAT is digital, right? There's a lot going on for families to navigate. So very much in line with the mission that you shared for Uprooted Academy. We have the exact same focus and emphasis on wanting to help assuage concerns for families and help you just be armed with more information and knowledge as you go into this process of trying to figure out what is best for you and why and how and all of those things. So again, thank you for having me, and I'll just go ahead and jump in. So just really quickly is kind of an initial side-by-side comparison of ACT and SAT. And kind of, again, what I'm hoping to achieve tonight with all of you is to really break down how are these two tests different from each other, what types of timelines make sense for when you should take them and why. And then also, I'm going to dig in a little bit more specifics about the new digital SAT. So for those of you who might be registered, this Saturday is the very first digital SAT in America. It has been in a digital format for the past year internationally. So they kind of use international students as guinea pigs for the past year. But here now in the States, the SAT is going to be digital starting this Saturday. So it's a very timely presentation for all of you. You might be taking it in a digital format this Saturday, or you might not be registered until May or June, or maybe even for next year. So I'll go ahead and jump in. So the ACT and SAT are the two college entrance exams that are both offered. So ACT is created by ACT Incorporated, and the SAT is created by College Board. So College Board is also who makes AP exams, also who makes the PSAT that you maybe took in October at your school. So these are two nonprofits that charge a lot of money, by the way, but they are technically nonprofits that put out these exams that students take for when they apply to college, when they apply for scholarships. Student athletes will very commonly be asked by coaches, what's your GPA, what's your ACT or SAT score? Those tend to be the first questions that students get when they're looking for college, for spots on athletic teams in colleges. So again, what I'm going to do is kind of break down these two tests for you. So before the SAT went digital, so in its pencil and paper format, it was longer than the ACT. But now in the new digital format, the SAT is now shorter than the ACT. So you can see the comparison. So without the optional kind of essay writing, the ACT is remaining unchanged, still pencil and paper, 2 hours and 55 minutes. The SAT in its new format that's only on a computer is now 2 hours and 14 minutes. Both tests have 4 sections. So ACT has English, math, reading, and science. The SAT has 2 sections that are both on verbal and 2 sections that are both on math. So again, 4 sections for both. But the way that they get scored is a little bit different. So with the ACT, with those 4 sections, you get 4 separate scores that get added up and then divided by 4. So you're kind of creating a composite as an average of your performance on 4 sections. The SAT, you basically have 2 of these scores, one in evidence-based reading and writing, that's what EBRW stands for, and one in math, and then those 2 scores get added together. There's a lot of confusion about the differences and how they're scored and like what does a 36 mean versus, an SAT. We have concordance tables on our website that show you exactly how the scores match between the exams, and those concordance tables are going to remain unchanged with the new digital SAT format. So those are still going to be consistent. Both tests are offered 7 times per year. So there are some months when they're both offered and then kind of other months where the 2 exams are rotating. But students do have ample opportunities to take these tests. And again, these are the national testing dates when the exams are offered on a Saturday or Sunday when you're registering and showing up at a testing site. A lot of schools, a lot of high schools, so maybe some of you actually will take the ACT or SAT at your school during the school day. So that's called district testing, and those are actually extra tests dates as well. So here's that scoring breakdown that I previewed for you before. So again, the ACT, you've got these 4 individual sections. Each one is between 1 and 36 points. So you take your score on each one, add them up and divide by 4, and then that is your composite ACT. For the SAT, again, there are 2 sections on reading, writing, and language, 2 sections for the math, but they do get added together as a sum. So there's no average there. It's kind of the 2 individual ones getting added together. So here's the current testing landscape. Again, we're coming up here. It's now officially March of 2024. So now the SAT is going to be in this computer format moving ahead. So prior to this, it was in this pencil and paper format, but now we are here. Both the PSAT and the SAT are now digital moving forward. These test dates that I'm sharing with you here are for this current academic year that we're in. Clearly, right, for the 2024 to 2025 school year, these dates will change, right, when they project into the fall, but they're all going to be roughly the same. So if there's an SAT that was August 26, 2023, there will be an SAT in August of 2024. They're just still confirming the exact schedules, but the months are going to be the same. So what I want to show you here that's really important is a lot of students don't know about this special service. And actually, the one thing that makes me really sad about the SAT becoming digital is they're not going to offer this service anymore. And now ACT is going to be the only ones who offer this. But SAT used to do this for 3 tests per year, same as ACT. And they offer this special service where you pay a nominal fee. And sometimes this is actually included with fee waivers. So you can also check on that with your college counselors. But when you opt into this optional service, you get a copy of your real exam back. So if I take the ACT here April of 2024, with this test information release service, after I take the exam and I get my score, I will actually get a copy of the real test with all of my answers and all of the correct answers. There is nothing more valuable in the world of preparing for these exams than having that opportunity to review a real test that you took. So again, the SAT used to offer this as well 3 times a year. They are cutting this service now that it's in this digital format. So after you take the SAT in the digital format, you will never see the questions, never see your answers ever again. It's like a big giant black box. ACT is going to remain very transparent with its exams, where again, 3 out of the 7 tests per year will offer this service. And I absolutely, absolutely recommend you take advantage of it. And even if you're already registered for one of these April or June tests and you didn't sign up for this, you can still call and still add it to your registration. So I definitely recommend that you do that, because again, it's so valuable to be able to review and learn from your mistakes. Now, a question that we get asked all the time is, how do I even know when to take this? Like, when am I ready? When should I take it? And the number one determining factor for when you're ready to take ACT or SAT is what math class you're in. So both the ACT and SAT go through Algebra 2 trig. So if you take Algebra 2 as a sophomore, then you're a little bit ahead of the game. We're kind of in the fall of your junior year, you would have been exposed to the hardest math questions that could appear on the ACT or SAT. So that means that you're in a unique position that you could actually try to get these exams done in the beginning of your junior year. If, however, in your junior year, you're taking Algebra 2 trig, you won't want to take it early in your junior year because you won't have yet been exposed to all of those math concepts that you need to be responsible for when you take the exam. So again, what's tough here is that both ACT and SAT get 5 years worth of math that they can test you on. So yes, you need to be sure that you've been exposed to and have learned the hardest possible stuff, which again is coming from Algebra 2 trig. But for a lot of students, the math prep that they do for ACT and SAT is actually reviewing what they first learned in 7th grade and 8th grade and 9th grade. Like, they just don't remember those super, super basic rules and formulas. You just need to put that time into reviewing. But again, when are you ready to take it? Once you've been exposed to Algebra 2 trig, you will have learned the hardest math possible. But there's a little asterisk there. You still need to make sure that you remember the earlier stuff. But again, in terms of like being exposed to everything possible, you'll have that after that Algebra 2 sequence. If any of you are in a school that uses the integrated math sequence as part of Common Core instead of doing algebra, geometry, Algebra 2, then for you, you would be ready after taking your first semester of integrated math 3. So both ACT and SAT test content through IM 3, but only the first semester, not the second semester. Here's an overview of the timing and the changes. So very briefly, the digital SAT, as I mentioned, got shorter, 46 minutes shorter to be precise. So they cut 36 minutes from the reading section and 10 minutes from the math. The biggest changes that they made for the digital SAT is they got rid of the long reading passages. So before, there was a long reading passage, and then students would have 10 or 11 questions, all from that one long reading passage. That's gone. Now it's a much shorter passage, and then it's one question per passage. So one thing I can share anecdotally is some students have shared that they do like this better, because before, if there was a reading passage that was long and you just felt like you didn't really get it and it was confusing and you were bored and you were zoning out, you had to answer 10 or 11 questions about that one passage, right? But now it's one really short passage per question. So if you're just not vibing with the content or it's confusing, there's just one question about it instead of more. So I will share just anecdotally, students have responded well to that change. The other big change that the SAT made is that they now allow calculators on every math question. So before, there's a non-calculator and a calculator section, but now calculators, are allowed on all math questions. So that's another thing that students are very happy about. So you'll see that the digital SAT these are two, or I guess three major changes, right, that are all very student friendly, student centric. So that's what the SAT is hoping is going to be more appealing to students. Because I don't know if you're aware of like the history of these exams, but SAT was kind of reigning king for a while, and then ACT started kind of creeping up. And starting in 2012, that's when the ACT became the more popular test than the SAT, and kind of ACT kept going up and SAT kept going down. Then in 2016, 4 years later, the SAT totally changed itself, made a lot of changes to kind of be more similar to the ACT to try to draw back more of that market share that they were losing, where more students were taking the ACT, but it didn't work. So the ACT kind of continued to be the more dominant test that students preferred. So now SAT is trying again, several years later, making more changes to try to, again, recapture student interest in the exam. And I will say that so far, a lot of students do, they're not minding the digital format. They like that the passages are shorter. They like that you can use a calculator on all the math questions, right? Because these are all things that the ACT has. Like the ACT is always allowed a calculator on all math questions. Okay, so here's the breakdown. Again, ACT is not changing. It's been really interesting ever since College Board announced all of these changes to the SAT. ACT is kind of the steady Eddie. They're like, you know what? We've been doing the same thing for 70 years. We're not changing anything. Parents and families can be very confident that the way that we score, like these things aren't changing at all. And we're going to kind of keep it the same way. So they've got their 4 sections: English, math, reading, and science. They're keeping the same number of questions, etc. What's changing with the new digital SAT, kind of with all of these changes, you've got your 2 back-to-back reading and writing sections, a 10-minute break in the middle, and then the 2 back-to-back math sections. So that's what students can expect, again, whether you're taking the new SAT in this digital format or the ACT. So here's a little bit more of a breakdown of kind of the reading, writing types of sections. So again, for the new digital SAT, the total time that they'll spend in those 2 32-minute stages is 64 minutes. The current pencil and paper ACT is 80 minutes total, because you've got that 45-minute English section, the 35-minute reading. 54 total questions in the digital SAT, 115 questions in the paper ACT. So this is probably where you're going to see like the biggest difference in terms of the number of questions. And the other thing that you can see here is that you're getting more time per question in the digital SAT than you are in the pencil and paper ACT. So I will share that students feel less time pressure in the SAT. So this like difference is palpable. You can feel on the ACT that there's a little bit more of a fire, like you've got to move faster, versus this new digital SAT format where they're giving more time per question. There are some important caveats to that, which I will share, like the math questions in the new digital SAT format, a third of them are long word problems. So even though you get more time per question, it takes you longer to answer the questions because you have to read like a whole story, figure out what information to extract to then solve a question. The other big change with the digital SAT is, yes, it's more time per question on average. However, they're reintroducing tough vocabulary, and they're also bringing in Old English poetry. So like Shakespeare-like questions, which for a lot of students are very challenging. So again, at a very high level, yes, the SAT, you will feel less rushed, but some of the questions are going to be more challenging to answer. So you have more time, but it's a little more challenging. ACT, you're going to have more of a rushed pace that you will feel, but it's very straightforward. It's like, do you know this formula to solve this math question? If you do, solve it. If you don't, guess, move on, right? It's much more direct and straightforward versus the SAT, which is using a little bit more complexity and trickery in some of the way that things are worded. But you do have more time to kind of work through and figure those things out. So again, the content on the tests is the same. So really for you, you need to just figure out where your strengths are and on which tests you perform better. Here's the comparison of the math. It's going to feel a little bit more comparable. Like the number of questions isn't as different, right, compared to the reading and writing that we just looked at. But same types of things, right? Almost the same amount of time. SAT is just splitting it into two of those sections. In terms of the number of questions, you do have fewer questions in the digital SAT compared to the pencil and paper ACT. One big difference is the pencil and paper ACT, the math questions are staying all multiple choice format. So all 60 questions, A, B, C, D, or E, you get multiple choice for all of them. In the new digital SAT, they're keeping the grid-ins. So what that means is that some of the questions are multiple choice format. Some of the questions are called SPR, which means student produced response. That means that you have to actually solve a math question. And if you think the answer is 4.52, you write 4.52. I guess technically you type 4.52. You don't write it anymore. You type 4.52. So you're not choosing, answer choice B is 4.52. You're actually producing it yourself. So when it comes to having a strategy around guessing and how guessing can give you more points, even if you don't know how to do a question, that's still going to exist on the pencil and paper ACT. But on the SAT, with those student produced responses, I mean, you could guess 1, you could guess 2, you could guess 0, right? But the odds of you getting a student produced response question right from guessing are basically 0. Whereas if you're guessing over here, your odds of getting it right are 20%, right? So much, much higher. So here's a little further breakdown of the digital SAT. Again, these numbers I've shared with you previously, but you've got the 2 modules, reading and writing, 32 minutes for each one, 27 questions for each one. And then for the math, 35 questions for each and 22 questions for each. Now, this part's really important for families to understand about the new digital SAT scoring. So this is the part that I'll just be very honest with all of you is what's scary for students. Like they like that there aren't long passages. They like that they can use a calculator, but this part is where it feels like it's not as fair. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. This is what students share. So I can kind of break this down for you. And then of course you're going to have your own reaction as well. But the way that the new digital SAT works is there are fewer questions, right? Like you saw, I mean, they cut 46 minutes. Clearly, they cut a lot of questions. The ACT still has more questions than the SAT. And basically what they're doing is they're using this really advanced algorithm through the computer. Again, because with a pencil and paper, we're all taking the same test, right? If we're all registered for the April ACT, no matter where I am in the country, when I show up and take that test, it is exactly the same as everybody else taking the April ACT. So how I score is compared to how everybody else scores, and then that's how there's a conversion that then happens to generate and determine our scores. With the SAT, every single test that every student takes is completely different. And the test that you take is determined by the computer. And your score that you get is determined based on an algorithm that makes predictions about how likely you are to get certain questions right based on your accuracy on pre-test questions. So let me break that down because it's a bit complicated, and it is. It's like item response theory, very, very advanced like math algorithm that's being used to generate the new SAT format. So everybody takes module 1. And the module 1 blend of questions is very evenly distributed with easy, medium, and hard questions. So you'll see 6 easy, 8 medium, 6 hard. Like if you drew that, right, as a bell curve, it would be a normal distribution. What happens is based on your accuracy in the first module, if you hit this kind of magical number threshold, it then determines if you go to the harder or easier second module. If you end up in the harder second module, you'll notice that you basically have no easy questions and they're all medium and hard. If you end up in the easier second module, you'll notice you basically have no hard questions and they're all easy and medium. The reason this is important is that your ceiling, like the maximum score that you can get on the SAT, is completely different, 600 versus 800, depending on whether you end up in the harder or the easier second module. So this is critically important for students to know. This is also what generates a lot of frustration and confusion for families, is this whole idea that the test is adapting and that every question is not worth the same amount, right? And a pencil and paper, every single question is worth 1 point. In this new format, that is not the case. So if based on your accuracy going through the test, the computer predicts that this question number 12, you shouldn't get right because it's harder, and then you do get it right, that question is now worth more points, right? But if the computer predicts you should be getting something right and then you miss it, you lose more points, right? So it's like this complicated way where the computer is using essentially artificial intelligence to make predictions about your human behavior. And then whether you do those things or not, either rewarding you more or penalizing you more. So again, it's complicated for sure, complex for sure. Again, they've been testing this for a long time. According to College Board, they've done extensive research, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to know that this is the reality of how this new digital SAT is formatted and structured. And it does go back to why it's so important that your accuracy in the beginning really, really makes a big difference in kind of that maximum score that you can achieve. So you need to treat every single question like it really matters, because every single question really does matter. Here's the same breakdown, except with reading and writing. Main thing to just highlight here is just the percentage accuracy is a little bit higher for the reading and writing. So in terms of making these comparisons, right, ACT versus SAT, as I already mentioned, on the ACT, every question is worth the same point value. On the SAT, the questions are not all worth the same amount of points. So this is just a quick recap of the changes with the digital SAT. It's now 2 hours and 14 minutes, right? It used to be over 3 hours. The two main sections, each one being divided, into 2 modules. No more long reading passages, still scored out of the same. Now you get a math calculator, and then now there's this whole new adaptive format. The reason, by the way, that they had to make this change to having this computer adaptive format is because there have been so many cheating scandals, particularly in China over the past decade with the SAT, that, to be honest, like, they kind of didn't really have a choice. Like, the only way for them to protect exam integrity is to make every single person take a different exam. Because what was happening is students were taking the test in Australia, like memorizing questions, posting them on the dark web, and then kids in China were accessing them and kind of seeing the test questions in advance and then taking the test. And so there was no exam integrity because they weren't able to control this. So again, it's one of those things, like, you understand why they made the change, because they do need to protect the integrity of the exam, but it also makes it more complicated, right? Because everybody's taking a different test. They believe and are arguing from their research that they can get an accurate score for a student even by answering a fewer number of questions, which is why the test is shorter. The ACT is not subscribing to that. And actually, it's interesting when students share that they like having more questions, because then they feel like if they make a couple careless mistakes, it doesn't hurt them as much when there are more questions, versus when there are fewer questions, you make a couple careless mistakes, it makes a big difference in your score. So again, I'm just sharing all the information with you, and you're going to kind of interact with both tests and decide what's right for you. But I'm just kind of sharing anecdotally what families kind of share on both sides of the spectrum. So if you are taking the digital SAT, you do have some kind of extra things that you need to be aware of and prepared for. Number one, you've got to practice your scratch paper strategy. This is new, right? You're not going to have the math question on a piece of paper for you to jump in and solve. You're going to see it on a screen. You're going to need to copy it. You're going to need to be careful when you copy it. You're going to need to keep all of your scratch paper organized. So if you flag question 10 and need to go back to it later, you can find your work from question 10 on your scratch paper, right? So this idea of having a scratch paper strategy is actually kind of weird, but is very, very important, right? You only get 5 sheets of paper. Some students like to draw grid lines. Some like to fold the paper. But for sure, whatever you do, you have to number your work as you go and be organized, because you don't want to be fumbling around, wasting time looking for your work when you need to be efficient in answering a question. Also super important is to practice with this new app. Like the Blue Book app is brand new for students. There are a ton of features. You can turn a timer on and off. You can have an annotation. You can use process of elimination. You can write yourself notes. You can highlight. You can do all these things in the screen. But if you don't practice with them, it's not going to help you. And you're just going to waste time fumbling around the day of. You have to take a practice test in this app before you take the real one. If I had a student show up to take the real SAT who had never interacted with the app before, I would be devastated. I would feel like a failure as someone families trust in this process. Like that's how important it is that you practice with the format. So on the Blue Book app, you log in with your exact same College Board credentials, and they have 4 free practice tests that you can take through the app before test day. You have to take these. And you have to review your mistakes and learn from your mistakes as you go. Because the best part of ACT and SAT is that they test the same stuff over and over and over again, right? Grammar rules don't change, math equations don't change. Like it's very predictable when you're preparing. But if you don't bother to look at what you've missed, you have no idea what content area gaps you have. So yes, it's amazing to take a practice test, but I tell my students all the time, like, good for you. You took an ACT. It was 3 hours. Like, I am proud of you. That is good. But the more important 3 hours are the 3 hours that you're going to spend reviewing every single question you missed until you know why you missed it and that you will never make that mistake ever again. That's where the real value of the process is. So you've got to expose yourself. You've got to get comfortable with the features. And then you also want to make sure that you interact with that calculator in the computer. Because if you forget a calculator or if your calculator dies, the battery dies and you need to use the computer one, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're comfortable interacting with it. All right, let me pause there really fast because we've had some questions come in. Oh, the recording. Okay, yes, it looks like that was answered. How many times can you take the tests? So you can actually take these exams as many times as you want. That's not what I'm recommending. I'm just letting you know, like technically you have complete flexibility to take the exams. One thing that's really, really important to know is the way that you report your scores on your college application. So you will fill out the Common App, for example, and you'll say, okay, here is the highest English I ever got in ACT, math, reading, science. Like you'll report the individual section scores and a composite. Let's say I took the ACT 10 times. Again, not recommending that, but let's just pretend hypothetically I took it a bunch of times, but I only want colleges to see this one time that I took it or these 2 times that I took it. ACT gives me that option because I can report the scores and then I can go to ACT's website and I can say, okay, I'm applying to NYU, send only these 2 test dates. Yes, I have 8 others, but I don't want those going anywhere. I took the test 10 times, but only these 2 I want to send to NYU. I have that choice with ACT. With College Board, however, you don't have that choice. So with College Board, when you order your score report to send to colleges, you're basically saying, hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm applying to NYU. Send them my scores. And College Board will send everything. So if I took the SAT 10 times, they would see all of those times. Now, there is one thing, like I can tell College Board, hey, actually, like don't send this one, or this one. Like you can choose which ones not to send. But then the score report says Jennifer has shared some of her scores, or it says Jennifer has shared all of her scores. So in the way that the score report gets sent to the colleges where you're applying, it's very obvious if you're hiding anything because it says some or all. Now, it's this interesting thing because colleges will say on their websites, don't hide your scores. We want to see everything you've ever taken. We will only consider your highest score. And all colleges say that they'll only consider your highest score. It's just a tough thing because let's say a student gets like 1,000 on an SAT and then like a 1,350 and a 1,400. Like I understand wanting to apply and just show the 1,350 and the 1,400 and not show the 1,000. Like I totally get that intuitively. You're like, well, they say they're only going to consider my 1,400, but they're also going to see that I got 1,000. Like, it's competitive, it's stressful, right? Like you want to put your best foot forward. So anyway, it's a complicated thing, but what I tell every family is if you want a time to like go and take a real exam with the pressure, with the weird proctors, being in a weird new place, like all of those little things that you just want to experience and get out of your system, do it with an ACT. Because if you do that with an ACT and you don't like your score, you literally have lost nothing except your time that you took it. But like colleges aren't going to see it. And there's no risk that you like need to feel like you need to hide it. Like you can truly take an ACT with none of that stress. But if you are going to take an SAT, you should be ready. Like you should feel prepared. You should feel like you're going to do your best when you go to take that, because again, it gets a little bit more of that wonky gray area when you go to take those exams, because you don't have the same flexibility in terms of how you report your scores. Let me see the other question that came in. Oh, going over some SAT, ACT prep options. So that isn't part of what's planned for the presentation, but we can always share, or, Uprooted Academy can share our contact information as well. If you're interested in learning more about the services that we provide to families, we also partner with schools and nonprofits to try to get access to more families to be able to access our preparation. So yeah, that's not part of what's planned for today, but happy to, connect individually offline about that, of course. Okay, so I want to do a quick time check here. So this next slide, I tell families all the time, I'm like, if you tune me out for a whole hour and you only listen to 1 minute, listen right now, because what I'm about to share is that important. And then kind of after I share this, I'll do a quick temperature check in terms of what you would want to hear next, because I do want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So I've always been very curious about this, because anytime I'm in a room, like I'll do these presentations for rooms with thousands of people, and I'll ask this question, whether there are 10 people or 5,000 people in a room, I get the same answer. And I always ask them like, hey, if you were running out of time on the ACT or SAT and you had to guess at the end, what letter would you guess? So I ask this question, and I am telling you, like 80 to 90% of people will always say C. I would guess C. And I think it's like something in elementary school or middle school, like at some point teachers tell students like, oh, if you guess C, it's in the middle. So I was curious about this. And so I went through, again, this is going to sound very nerdy, but I embrace that about myself. And I really love data. And I think this was really important. So I was curious about this. And so I went through 85 real ACTs and SATs, and I looked at the last 10 questions of each section. So again, I only looked at the end where students tend to run out of time. Because across the whole exam, every single answer choice has to appear an equal amount. But at the end, where students run out of time, I was just curious, how frequently is the right answer C versus other letters, right? Because we know going in that most students guess C. It's just this natural thing. So I was just curious, is that the right letter to guess? So not surprisingly, at the end of the sections, again, this is not across the whole test. This is just the end where students run out of time. C is actually the least frequent right answer at the end of the test. After C comes B, then A, and then D. So basically what I tell students is I'm like, look, if you run out of time, or if you see a question and you have no clue how to answer it, like literally zero clue. If you see a question where you're like, oh, okay, I know I can eliminate these and now I'm down to B or C, okay, this doesn't apply because you're making an educated guess. But if you have no clue, like literally zero clue how to answer something, or if you're running out of time and you're never going to even look at the questions, you should either guess all the first bubble or all the last bubble. And that's just my big tip of the day, to hopefully you'll all bring that with you. Okay. So I have some more content that I can share, just kind of comparing ACT and SAT in terms of like the content that they test, like what are they actually testing in English and math and reading and science. And then I also just have like some big picture tips. I would have time to do all of it, but I just want to make sure if there are any questions, I want to pause here just so we can be sensitive to time and see if there's anything else that you would want me to make sure that I cover. I think there was a question that came in, like, what can I do if I'm in 8th or 9th grade and I want to kind of get ahead of preparing for these tests? And that's such a wonderful question. What I would say is if you're in 8th or 9th grade and you want to feel like you're doing something towards this preparation, the best thing that you can do is remember what you learned in school. So I know that that sounds silly, but for so many juniors, the challenge for them when they're getting ready for these exams is they just don't remember geometry rules or algebra rules, and they don't remember grammar. Like, where do I put a comma versus a period versus a semicolon versus a colon? Like, to be honest, like, it's kind of just basic fundamental stuff that they've just forgotten because they haven't seen it for so long. So if you're in 8th or 9th grade and you're taking algebra or you're taking geometry and you're kind of getting exposed to all of these math equations, or you're in a class in which you're learning the difference between its and your and two and two and two, all of that content is going to come up on the ACT. So the best preparation for these exams is just being on top of your schoolwork, because that's what's going to be tested. So again, the best preparation is just learning and remembering what you're exposed to in school, right? When people have to do test prep for ACT and SAT, they're not really learning new stuff. Like, most test prep is just reminding students what they haven't seen and what they've forgotten because they haven't been exposed to it for years. So for 8th and 9th graders who are really on it and on top of this, like, first of all, I love that. And that's wonderful. And the more you can just kind of be disciplined about remembering what you're learning. And, one thing too that I'll share is, let's pretend that you take a math class and on every math test, you get a 90, right? A 90%. Well, that means that there's this 10%, right? That across all of these exams, you don't know, which at the end of the year, like, those are going to accumulate. And then you're looking at, wow, there's stuff I don't know because I never went back and reviewed it. So being really disciplined about reviewing and learning from your mistakes as you go is critical. If you have an English teacher who edits your essay and circles things in which you've made a mistake, like you forgot to put a comma here, or you use the wrong form of to, or whatever it is, go back and learn what that rule is, because that's going to be on the ACT or SAT. So again, do we have 8th and 9th graders who sign up for our test prep and kind of try to get ahead with doing lessons? And yes, of course. But I will say again that I really truly believe that the best preparation is just being super on top of what you're learning at school and being very honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't know, so that you are good about recognizing, like, ooh, I didn't really learn fractions all that well. Like, I'm not good at adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing fractions. Like, I need to put in some time to go back and address that content area gap for myself, so that I know how to crush fractions by the time I get to more advanced math, or by the time I get to ACT, SAT. So being honest with yourself in that process is also really critical. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions that have come in. Looks like we've answered what came into the Q&A. And then also, thank you. It looks like we answered what's in the chat. So I guess I'll just keep going unless any other questions. Any other questions? I'm going to escape out of here really fast. I think I will show these pie charts. Yeah, and then I just have the test day advice. Okay, I'll show these really quickly and then jump to the tips at the end. So as I mentioned, I'm a little bit of a nerd, right? I love data. I love analyzing these exams and just helping students and families understand what to expect. And hopefully what you've heard tonight, right, reinforces that, the grammar that you're going to see on ACT and SAT is not something really advanced that you have to learn as a junior. Like, it's this super, super basic stuff that you should have been learning since elementary school. But if you don't have English teachers who are sticklers for these things, you're not going to know them, right? And then you need to put in time to review apostrophes or review parallel structure, or remember the difference between an adjective and an adverb, or review subject verb agreement or pronoun agreement. Like, these are all things, again, that If you have an English teacher who's really nitty-gritty about grammar, that's actually something wonderful that you should embrace, even though I know you probably are annoyed about it, but it's actually great because it's going to set you up for more success because you're already going to know this content, which is really good. But here's a side-by-side comparison of the English, kind of what's tested on ACT and SAT. These are just the top 3 areas, how frequently they're tested, and then how many points you actually garner based on your accuracy in those areas. So you can see that basically usage of mechanics and punctuation are the 2 most important lessons, whether you're taking the ACT or SAT. You just have to know rules in those areas. With the math, here's the breakdown between ACT and SAT. You'll see they're both very algebra heavy, right? Which makes sense. It's algebra and algebra 2, and then just 1 year of geometry. So just naturally, you're going to see more algebraic concepts. Comparing the 2 to each other, again, the top 5 areas that are tested the most frequently are the same between the ACT and SAT. It's just the order is a little bit different. But the top 5 kind of areas of concepts of what you need to know is the same. The reading questions, so kind of the structure of the types of questions that they ask and how frequently, also something really important to review and understand. Again, the reading sections are not asking you questions about things that you're supposed to show up already knowing, right? That's more what the grammar and the math sections are for. The reading is really, all of the answers are there. They're in a passage, they're in a figure, they're in a table. It's just a matter of you finding that information with the time pressure. But if you had all day, if you had a year to do one ACT or SAT reading section, you should never miss a single question because truly every single answer is in the passage. It's just a matter of you finding it. That, by the way, is the same with the ACT science. So a lot of times people hear ACT science and they get scared thinking, oh my gosh, I have to know physics, I have to know bio, I have to know chem. That's actually not the case. The ACT science section is truly a reading section in disguise. You're just reading about scientific content, which, by the way, the SAT reading section also has passages and content that are about science. So really, this area is identical between the 2 exams. It's just that the ACT has it in a separate section and the SAT peppers the same types of questions throughout the reading. So kind of last thing to share are just these general tips for success. So again, never leave a question blank. So whether it's the ACT or the SAT, there's no penalty for wrong answers. So you don't want to leave anything blank. And whenever you guess, you should always guess the same letter. So students sometimes, like with the ACT and with the old SAT pencil paper, like to make little zigzag patterns with their Scantrons. Nope. Statistically, if you're going to guess, you should always guess the same letter. This part is more kind of with SAT scratch paper and ACT booklets, but sometimes students think that they're not allowed to write in the booklets. That's totally false. You can and you should write all over the booklet. So for the ACT, for example, like you should be underlining as you're reading, you should work out math problems, you should cross out answer choices when you think they're wrong, like be very, very active with your booklet. Don't think that you're just passively absorbing information. Like the more you're writing in it, the more engaged you'll be. So absolutely, you should write all over it. And then last thing, this is really only applicable to the ACT now, used to also apply to the SAT, but make sure that anytime you're doing time practice, you're practicing with a Scantron so that, bubbling your answers takes time and precision. So it's also a skill that you're going to want to practice. In terms of how to improve on the exams, as I mentioned earlier, you always want to start, let me take a full-length practice ACT, a full-length practice SAT, right? The content is the same, but the way that they're structured, the timing, the number of questions, the way the questions are worded, the complexity of the writing, the number of word problems in math, like that's where they're different. And you have to see if there's one in which you perform higher than the other. So take these diagnostics, compare the scores so you can see where you're stronger and then determine which test you're going to take. However, reviewing content area gaps is the most important part of your preparation. So if you take a diagnostic ACT and SAT, if I miss a question on an ACT about the area of a triangle, and then I decide to take the SAT, I still need to review the area of a triangle, right? So again, like use your mistakes from any test that you ever take to guide what content area gaps you have, because that's going to be critically important to make sure that you're creating a study plan that's customized to your needs. And then as you do more practice, you're reviewing, you're correcting your mistakes as you go. And that's what's really, really, really important, because the biggest mistake students make is they just take a test every single weekend or super frequently, and they just test, test, test. This is not an area for quantity over quality. This is all about quality over quantity. It is more important to take exams well and to review and learn from your mistakes than it is to just take a bunch of tests. That's really, really important, because sometimes people think you just have to take tests all the time to improve, and that's not the case. You need to be thoughtful to review and learn from your mistakes in between each practice test. Excuse me. So kind of last kind of parting messages on the topic. So number one, it is important to prepare early. This test optional shift has been very confusing for the past couple years, because schools would say that you don't have to have an exam to be accepted. But then if you wanted a scholarship, you needed an exam, or if you wanted to play sports, you needed an exam, or if you were going to be placed into certain classes, you needed an exam score. So again, it wasn't required for admission, but it was really advantageous for students who had scores to get placed out of certain classes, and then they saved time and money, or they got bigger scholarships, or they were able to play and get like a full ride because of their scores. Things have been kind of stirred up in this space, just with some Ivy League colleges announcing that the exams are now required again. So again, work with your counselors to make sure that you're getting the best advice for you for what you need in this process. But presuming that you're planning to shift towards wanting to take one of these exams, I mean, it's definitely advantageous, because then if you end up taking it and having a great score, it can only help you, right? It's not going to hurt you. And actually, the data that have come out from the past 2 years of acceptance is that students who applied with scores were accepted at a 50% higher rate on average than students who applied without scores. So if you're in a position to prepare and do well on these tests, it is advantageous for you to take it. But if you're in a position that it's going to create undue stress or harm for you, then you wouldn't want to take the test. And then you would just know that you have to apply to places that aren't going to require it and truly don't consider it. But if you're in a position that you're like, I could take this on, like I could prepare, I want to do well, then you absolutely should, because it can only help you. There is a trend, and this is also just something really important to consider, right? Colleges are under a lot of pressure to be more holistic in the way that they consider students, and that this is not just all numbers based, right? Like they want to know about your character. They want to know about your interest in the schools. They want to read your letters of recommendation from your teachers and really get a sense that they get to know you and how you think and how you respond to difficult situations and how you perform and how you work hard. Like these aspects of who you are and your character are so, so, so important. So make sure that you're finding balance, right, with all of this. Sometimes people can get sucked into GPAs and test scores. And I understand that, because there's a lot of pressure around, expectations around the rigor of the classes you take and your performance and all of that. But it's also just so important to nurture yourself, and to expose yourself to different opportunities and experiences. Maybe you love them, or you learn that you don't like them, like whatever, as long as you're just trying and exposing yourself is so great. And then last thing too, don't get scared if you look at colleges and their average test scores seem higher now than they were before COVID. So basically what happened is when tests became test optional, students would only report their scores if they were really, really high. So essentially what happened is, let's pretend a school used to have like a middle 50% range of like a 1200 to a 1400 for the SAT. Once they became test optional, like students who took the test and got a 1200, 1250, 1300 were like, ooh, it's not high enough, which by the way, it totally was, but that's what they perceived and they didn't report it. And then kids were only reporting like 1400s, 1500s. So the averages got artificially inflated to look higher than they really are and really should be. And colleges are accepting students who have test scores below those numbers. So again, a lot of this is personal. You need to communicate with a single counselor or advisor who knows your unique situation. But as general advice, don't get scared if you look and go, oh my God, their test scores got so high the past few years. There's a reason for that. And it's because only people with really high scores were reporting them. But again, that doesn't mean that the colleges won't accept students who have scores that are, close to those, but just a little bit below. So last thing is just what to bring with you on test day to make sure that you're prepared. This first column is pretty much what's required. And then this second column is kind of the stuff that I recommend to students just so that they're prepared for whatever environment they might encounter. Right? You never know if you're going to need a tissue, or if the room is going to be really warm or really cold, and do you need layers so that you can kind of adjust and be comfortable, right? Because there are going to be things in the environment you can't control. So you want to be able to control as much as possible how you respond to those things so that you stay comfortable and stay focused and all of that. Last thing is just to share that they are still providing accommodations for the ACT. Here's kind of the main breakdown of how it compares for regular time versus extended time. And then here's the comparison of that for the digital SAT. So it is important for you to know if you do receive accommodations at school, you're going to want to work with your counselor to get those accommodations also approved for you for ACT or for SAT. All right. I know this is a whirlwind and it's like so much info, so much info, so much info. But there's a lot obviously to share in this space. So let me go ahead and open the chat. It looks like a question just came in.
Oh,
Oh,
I
perfect.
added
Thank
your
you.
the website.
Oh, sure. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and my email's on here as well if anybody has any other questions about ACT, SAT, any of this stuff. But yeah,
If anyone
thank
has
you.
any questions, now's the opportunity. While you're thinking of questions, I just want to add, Dr. Winward, I loved your scratch paper strategy. I haven't seen that before, but I think it's fantastic to have that. Felt a little bit like origami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where you
But it
fold
was
it
great.
up.
Yeah, it's great to stay organized,
Yeah,
especially
you
when
have
you're taking
to.
an exam. You can become very nervous. So that was great. And I also just wanted to also reiterate as I have my children all graduate from college. They all took the SAT multiple times, so have been through that process. And I to completely uh, just want to second, I don't know how to say it, your idea. Uh, 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 go over the questions you missed. That's going to be the most useful thing that you can do. I can totally, that's 100% agree with that. And I would also even add, questions that you're not sure of, but you got right anyway. Also look at those, because if you weren't
Yeah.
100% sure, then you might have gotten it right because you were lucky. So
Mhm.
I would also just add that. But definitely going over the questions that you missed is certainly helped my kids, or at least that's what I told them anyway to do.
Right. Yeah.
I think
No,
we
no,
might
for
have
sure.
had a question here.
Yeah, it looks like somebody asked, I think if you're asking about the practice website, do you mean the Blue Book app website for College Board? Yeah, they're going to want you, they have requirements in terms of the devices that you can use to access, and then also like the browser capabilities. Let me exit out of here really fast. And I can get that URL for you. Let me see if I can find it quickly. College Board, Blue Book app. But yeah, you're going to have to, here we go, device requirements. Let me give you this link really fast in the Zoom chat. Oh, it looks like I can only chat with hosts and panelists. So I just put this in here. And then if you don't mind,
Oh, okay.
Antonia, just
Let's
putting it for everybody. Um,
hold on here.
But that website is going to show you what device you have to have, and then what browser kind of down, if you need to update your browser or anything like that to be able to access the app. So yes, it could be that the device you're using or the browser that you're using isn't compatible. So that website I just shared is going to break all that down for you so you know which one to use. But ideally, you're using a computer or a tablet to be able to access the Blue Book app.
Okay, so so for students who might not have a computer, then their own
You'd
personal
have to use
computer.
a
Okay.
school device, yeah.
Okay. And will one be provided also? I understand they'll be provided at the test site if they don't have one.
Yeah, so if they're taking it at their school, a lot of schools are providing devices, but if they're taking it like they register, like let's say for the Saturday test, you have to show up with a device with this app already downloaded on the device. So students would need to communicate with their counselors at school if they need to borrow a device or check one out of the school to be able to use for the test.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions anyone has for Dr. Winward while she's here? No? Okay. Well, Dr. Winward, thank you so much for being here
Sure.
tonight, and that was wonderful. I learned I've been looking at this for a while, and I learned a lot. Obviously, with your 20 years of expertise, I'm so glad you were able to share that with
Sure.
our students and families. I just wanted to just say just to end uh, just a few. Oh no. Okay, let me skip that. Just a few slides here ending to stay engaged with us. Read our blogs for tips and tricks. Come to our free events such as this one. And one last but not least, a word about our free major and career fair coming up on Saturday, March 16th, where students will have the opportunity to meet or to interact with professors and professionals in 12 different areas of interest. So please make sure to register for that. Shantae, if you can put that in the chat, that'd be great. So we hope to see you on March 16th. And finally, thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Winward, for taking the time to be here. And please fill out the survey. Let us know. Give us your feedback, please, because as I said before, that helps us improve future workshops. So I guess that might be it. Yeah, I think Shantae's putting a few things on the chat. Yeah, so that's it. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Winward, for all this information. And if anyone's taking the test in the next few months, good luck. Hopefully you've learned something here that you can apply to your study.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.